Hello, audience. Welcome to Business Miles by Tillite, your front row seat to the untold stories of travel. I am Anish, your navigator and host for today. My guest is Chris Christensen, the creator of the Amateur Traveler podcast and blog, one of the longest running, and dare I say, one of the most successful travel content platforms. With his amazing perspectives, right here he is. Folks, grab your coffee, fasten your seatbelts. Let's talk to the engineer who solved travel. Chris, welcome to Business Miles.
Thank you.
So, Chris, today promises to be a very exciting podcast for me and our audience as well. Why don't you first talk to us about your journey in getting to this point in your career?
Sure. Although I've had multiple different journeys, which one do you want to talk about first?
Let's talk about, just your corporate journey, and then we talk about your
Sure.
travel journey or your amateur traveler journey.
Yeah. So, corporate journey, I worked for 43 years as a engineering manager, director of engineering, executive vice president of engineering, depending on the company, in high tech, always in software for hardware and software companies. And then for the last 30 years in web-based technologies and web-based companies, doing websites for a great variety of companies over the last 30 years.
And which brings me to my first question, right? It's very hard for people to step away from, their regular corporate jobs, if you will, right? And you've worked at some of the best companies we know of, Apple, HP, TripAdvisor, at that. So, what prompted you to make this shift to Amateur Traveler, your podcast and blog, full time?
Well, first of all, I didn't for a long time. So, to put some timelines on it, I started in my career out of college in '84. I did or did at least a year worth of work through co-op programs and things before I graduated, but really started full time in '84 and didn't quit until last year, until 24. And I started Amateur Traveler, the podcast and the blog, in 2005. So for 19 years, I did Amateur Traveler and another podcast or two or three part time, and did them on the side along with, trying to stay married and doing some volunteer work and doing some blogging and all of those things. And the main reason that I kept doing the engineering is, one, I enjoy engineering. It's something that I have always enjoyed doing ever since my best friend in high school's rich aunt gave him an Apple II computer and we got to try out programming, which is how I was introduced to programming in my junior year of high school. So I've always enjoyed that. Also, is a whole lot easier to make a living as a software engineer or a software manager than it is as a travel writer, travel journalist, travel podcaster, whatever I am, whatever label you put on me, content creator. And so I did it part-time for a long time. And then the first big career change is, so I worked a lot in startups. I worked for about 20 years in startup companies, plus IBM and HP and American Express and TripAdvisor, but I also worked in other lesser known companies. And in 2012, I actually left TripAdvisor to go to another startup company, left a director of engineering job, and worked my way down the chain to be an engineer, to learn some technology that I wanted to learn, Ruby on Rails, to do my own startup company.
Right.
Which I did, was not successful, but I left that company after about 18 months to launch a product. It was called Blogger Bridge, and you've never heard of it, which is why it wasn't successful. And I did that also by doing contracting work for about 6 years. And so that gave me a really nice mix of, I can support myself as a software engineer, and then I can also do much more traveling, because I was working about a third of the time at that point, because software engineering contracting pays well enough that you can do it part-time and still make a decent living. And so we weren't dipping into savings or anything like that. And then that ended because somebody I'd worked with before at 4 different companies, including one of the startups and Apple and Trip had brought me into TripAdvisor. Oh, I guess 3, and then I had contracted for him at Time Out and at TripAdvisor. So he actually said, "I'm starting another startup company. Do you want to come?" So I went back to work full time. So my career has been. He used to say I was the only person who knew who he was trying to work their way down the corporate ladder, but I was basically trying to give myself more flexibility for travel. And obviously, when I worked back to work full time, I lost my travel flexibility, but then COVID hit. So I spent COVID working at a startup company that got bought by American Express before we met in person. We actually worked through COVID. And then by the time we had our first in person meeting, we had sold the company to American Express, or at least had inked a deal for American
Right.
Express at that point. So I worked there for 2 more years and then retired. And I use retired in quotes because I work only 7 days a week now, but only on one job, only on 2 podcasts and 3 blogs, versus what I have done sometimes in between. And the main reason for that is the open road was calling me. I had actually 3 years on the acquisition agreement that they would pay me to stay, and I actually let go of the 3rd year's payment, which was a little less than the first 2, and said I needed to do more traveling again. So it's kind of an early retirement. It's kind of a career change, but it's an opportunity to hit the road a lot more. And this year, 2025, I've been traveling about half the time. So, quite a number of trips.
Well, it's not usual to see people, leave their love of software engineering to pursue their love for travel, right? And you've been in love twice, and I'm not talking about your personal life, but you've been in love work-wise twice, which is quite unique.
Yeah, 3 times if you
Speaking,
count my 44 years of marriage. So,
yeah, 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 absolutely. And wow, 44 years. Wow.
coming up if she sticks with me till November.
Yeah, I sure hope so. It's not too far away. Congratulations to you and your wife in advance. 44 years is a milestone.
Yep.
Very
Well,
unusual in today's times.
we started when I was 5, so that's not quite true.
You
But I wasn't legally old enough to participate in a toast at my own wedding, so we were
mm,
pretty young.
mm. But nonetheless, I think, starting at 5 and 44 years together, hats off to you guys. Well, speaking of TripAdvisor, right now, Amateur Traveler is in many ways a competitor to TripAdvisor, right? I've been a TripAdvisor
Well, I
user
don't
for,
think so. Although when I worked at TripAdvisor, they sort of felt that way. So they asked me not to run any advertising on my website for the time that I was there, and then arranged a starting bonus to kind of buy out the ads on the website, as it were, because they kind of realized it late in the process. Yeah, we're in somewhat of the same space, although TripAdvisor, if you look at the business that they're running, is
Mhm.
in a very enviable spot in terms of the funnel of purchase. So
Yeah,
if you think about Amateur Traveler, I'm often at the wrong end of the funnel. I'm the one who gets you an idea that maybe you should go to Mumbai, or maybe you should go to the Peruvian Amazon, where TripAdvisor is the last one you check before you book that hotel room, and so they get more of the revenue,
yeah.
but are probably weaker on inspiration than Amateur Traveler. And that's Steve Koffer, who I worked for, who is the founder of TripAdvisor, had said that when I was at the company to the employees there, that was an area he was looking to improve on. So I don't think I'm telling him anything he doesn't know. So
Which brings me to my question. You are both, if I say if there is a value chain of travel, you are in that, you are both playing in that entire continuum. Question is, what do you think, you know, companies like TripAdvisor and Amateur Traveler um, uh, do well, and where is their opportunity today to do something different?
well, It is really that thing that I was talking about. So what Amateur Traveler does well is inspiration. So in my media kit every year, I include stories where people say, I never even thought about going to Namibia until I heard your show, and now we just honeymooned there. So that's the kind of thing that warms the cockles of my heart when I hear it, because
Hmm.
it's really what I think that show is good at. The second
Right.
thing it's good at is I have a lot of other people who I hear, including people who are other travel creators like me, who say every time I go someplace, I download your show because I'm sure you'll have an episode about wherever I'm going, because we have 960 some episodes right now. I don't know the exact number because I've got two more that I've done than have come out yet. So I can always not quite remember exactly number, but I think it's 965 or something like that. And so we've covered a lot of destinations. It's gotten to the point where I kind of joke that if we don't have an episode on it, you probably don't need to go there. Uh, so we also get used quite a lot, and I suddenly become plural when I talk about Amateur Traveler. It's just me. So Amateur Traveler. I also see the show get used a lot for travel planning. So we try and make the show as detailed as practical as possible, so that when people are actually going to that destination, I will download episodes of my own show when I go to a destination to see, what restaurant did we recommend, what hotel did we recommend, what tours, what itinerary, what sites should we see, and such. And other people use it that way as well. So that's a place where we overlap a little bit with TripAdvisor, because TripAdvisor, what they're good at is the reviews, in the sense of, if you want to do a particular tour or you want to stay in a particular hotel, it's a good resource for seeing what kind of questions to answer. It's not a definitive resource, in the sense you've got mostly amateur people, so they may have only stayed at one hotel and they're reviewing this one, so they don't necessarily have. So I run a hotel review site, for instance, where I have travel writers who've stayed at a lot more hotels, and
Yeah.
so their reviews are going to be a little more authoritative.
Yeah.
But there's wisdom in the crowds. If someone in TripAdvisor review says that it's far from the subway. I think of a hotel I got in Kowloon, in Hong
Kuala
Kong.
Lumpur. Yeah. Okay.
Some
Okay.
people said it was near the subway. Some people said it was far from the subway. Well, that depends on how far you like to walk.
Yeah.
But at least it gives you the question and answer. Well, how far is it from the subway, and is that far from me? But if everybody says the hotel is dirty, the hotel is dirty. And so what it's not good at is the overall. If you look at, for instance, San Francisco, for many years, the best thing to do in San Francisco, according to TripAdvisor, the highest rated single activity, was a Segway tour. And I'm sure it's a great Segway tour, but I guarantee that if you go to San Francisco and you don't do the Segway tour, but you go to Alcatraz, you won't regret it. And if you do the opposite, I think you will. So it's not good at the answers that it gives for the top 10 things to do, I think, are poor, because
Mm.
they're not really done with talking to somebody who's done all 10. They're done more in isolation. So it's good at some things and it's not good at others. They're good at making money, though. And I enjoyed working for them for that point of view. It was a well-run company. I appreciated working for Steve Kaufer and the other people at that company.
Got it. And you are in the inspiration space, they are in the review space. Is there a space in between, or is there a space at the end where there is potential to create some more value for travelers?
Well, so they have moved in. When I was there, they were starting to move into from just doing reviews to doing reviews all the way to being an OTA, an online travel
Yeah.
agent. And they are doing that
So
now,
they
where they will
just add.
then do the
Yeah.
booking, right?
Yeah.
And that is a better economic uh, opportunity for them, because they've got you there. As long as they've got you, you might as well just do the booking while you're there. In fact, while I was there, I was working on I was in charge of the flight search engine. So I was in charge of TripAdvisor flights and the Seat Guru product. And from an engineering point of view, I had a boss who was in charge of it from the business point of view, who was a real airplane wonk. He once looked at the tickets that were lying on my desk, or my boarding pass, and said, why are you sitting in that seat? It doesn't have a window. So he looked at the boarding pass and knew what flight it was and knew what airplane they were running and knew the configuration by heart. So he was a real airplane wonk, and I
Yeah,
enjoyed the business people there. Were some of the best business people I've worked with in terms of knowledge of the industry. They were sharp and they were on top of things, and they had numbers to back up any opinion they had. And that was really a lot of the culture was a very engineering centric culture. Since the founder was an engineer, you prove things with numbers. You didn't just say, I think this should, I think we should go this way. You said, I think we should add a checkbox here, and based on the numbers that I'm looking at and how many people sign up for our email list, that if we put a click box right here for sign up for our email newsletter, that'll be a $500,000 checkbox. And that was the kind of things you could get from the business people in that group. And I've seldom worked with business people who were that aware of their industry and that knowledgeable of user behavior.
absolutely. And I've been a loyal TripAdvisor user for a good part of 20 years, and I can vouch for using them as my default hotel review platform.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Both of you are at some level in the user generated content space, right? Now, in amateur traveler's case, you are the expert user. But does amateur traveler also, invite other users to contribute stories or, maybe reviews? Do you do that as well?
So for the podcast, most of my shows are interview shows, because even this year where I'm traveling half the time, that would not be enough to generate. Basically, my goal when I started was 48 episodes a year. Give myself 4 weeks off a year. Through 20 years, I think my average was 47 and a half. So I pretty much, came close enough to that number that I feel pretty good about it in terms of longevity. There's no way that I could do that and travel. It's just too much. And so it very quickly, when I started the show, it actually was going to be about my travel stories, which was a dumb idea because I wasn't traveling as much. I was traveling 4 weeks a year and podcasting 48 weeks a year, and that math doesn't work. But it very quickly became an interview show, and I found that I really thoroughly enjoyed talking to people, some of whom have been to places that I've never gone to, and some have been to places I've never going to go to, and others have been places that I've been, and I'll jump in more obviously in those episodes. I've got one coming up on eastern Turkey and Şanlıurfa and Gaziantep, where I happen to have been. But this guest was more knowledgeable than I was and has gone farther and has gone more recently. And so all of the shows are with somebody who's been there in the last year and who could tell a story, who is knowledgeable on the destination. It might be a guidebook author, it might be another travel creator, quite often because they're good storytellers, but sometimes
Mhm.
it's a traveler and listen to their show. And some of my best guests are not travel professionals, but when they talk about a destination, you can tell they've done their homework and they know what they're talking about.
Got it. Right. Wonderful. Which brings me to this, point that's been with me for some time. 47 and a half episodes for about 20 years,
Yeah.
and going strong, right? Most podcasts fail by the time they hit episode 7. Why didn't amateur traveler fizzle out like that? And, what's your recipe for success?
So I love podcasts, first of all. I started the show because I love podcasts. I love the format of podcasts. I just went for a 3 mile walk this morning, and the whole time I was walking, I was listening to podcasts, and am a thoroughly love being in the podcast ecosystem, and that's why I started a show. Is I love podcasting, so I think that's part of it. I think if I hadn't become an interview show, I would have stopped because I would have run out of content. And a lot of people don't think through, are they going to have more content? If you do a news based show, you'll always have more news, but you won't have a long tail. You won't have shows that are valuable 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And I went the long tail route is, I don't want to talk about something that's going to be there today, but won't be there tomorrow. I'm trying to do a show that 10 years from now, if you download the show on Paris, some of the restaurants may have closed, but probably you could make a great itinerary even from that show, even though we, haven't refreshed it in 10 years. So I think, definitely if I hadn't gone the interview route, I would have stopped, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing it. There was definitely wearing at times, and I would say my ability to push through and stick things is probably above average
Got
because
it.
there were a lot of shows in the early days that were edited on a Friday night for a Saturday morning 7 a.m. release, and I had just worked all week, probably all week at a startup company, and at least at one point working at a startup company while trying to build another startup company and doing 3 regular podcasts at that point. So my ability to push through and get things done is above average. I'm probably further behind in any sort of streaming shows or TV than a lot of people. I don't have as much time for consuming content because I'm making it.
Got it. The other thing I know, content that has lasted the test of time and content that has been consumed over and over again
Mhm.
is, virality at some level or discoverability, right? I'd love to know, if you have any discoverability, suggestions. Um,
Podcast doesn't have a lot of virality, in the sense that there's the iTunes podcast directory, there's some other podcast directories, and they'll feature things, but there's no algorithm for podcast. I was just at a travel show, and we were talking with other content creators about the TikTokification of some of the social media channels like Instagram. And what that means is in Instagram, it used to matter who you follow and you would see their content. And now, where TikTok, it doesn't matter as much who you follow, they determine what you like and they'll show you more of that content. And that's a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword in the sense that places where they have an algorithm like that, like YouTube has an algorithm like that, you can have something go viral because you can discover things you didn't know about, but you are interested in. So those
mhm,
kind of platforms tend to have more virality. But on the other hand, it's harder to keep your audience, right? I'm doing some things recently on TikTok, doing an everyday video. I've seen some hit, 9,000 views, and a lot of them stay around 200. And it's very uneven depending on what keywords I put in, depending on what the topic is. Podcasting is not like that. If I do a show on Paris, which is a very popular destination, it doesn't get twice the number of downloads of the show that I do on Comoros, which is a almost completely unknown destination, because people in podcasting get every episode. They may not
right.
consistently listen to every episode, but the other thing that's weird about podcasting is if you don't listen to a show after a while, the leading podcast players like the Apple podcast player will unsubscribe you automatically.
hmm
And so your listeners are your listeners. They get pretty much everything. They listen to pretty much everything, and they stick with you if they still like what you're doing. But so it's easier to keep an audience, but harder to build it. It's harder
mm
to go viral. Viral is usually word of mouth and PR. And so the few shows that we would say that have gone, truly viral, like, the very first true crime podcast shows hit a level of virality that we don't normally see in podcasting, but it's word of mouth more so
Right.
than anything else. So virality is harder in podcasting. If you want viral, go to TikTok or YouTube.
Well, today everyone seems to be on it, you know, excited about content creation because they think this is a good way to generate revenue as well, right? I know, your primary channels are the podcast and the blog. But have you considered channels like YouTube? You are clearly doing TikTok now. But, what about channels like YouTube as a way to distribute your podcast? Have you
Well, so
considered
my
that, and
podcast
how do you
as
think
an
about that?
audio podcast is on YouTube. And then I'm doing the work that I'm doing with shorts is just over the last couple months. I've been experimenting with doing some more regular YouTube shorts, but they're not the same thing. They're not a long form interview show. Obviously, they're a 60-second show. So I've been doing content for another podcast, the Daily Tech News Show, which is a popular tech show for, I don't know, more than 5 years. I'm not sure how long I've been doing it, but I've done more than 220 segments for that show that are a tech and travel minute. So a 1 minute app or destination or tool or something. So I'm taking some of that content that I have been doing for the last, 5, 6, 7 years and repurposing that as shorts on Instagram and YouTube and TikTok. But you have to think about different channels with different content. Obviously, you
Right.
can't take long form content and pour it into short form or vice versa.
Yeah. And on when it comes to distributing on YouTube, right? Is there a you know YouTube is driven much more by discoverability, right? I'm an SEO
Yep.
guy, you know,
YouTube has an algorithm, right?
yeah. So what's the way to master that? If you have some insights on that.
I'll tell you when I do. So
Okay, all right, all right. Um,
I don't think I think basically if you really want to master YouTube, you have to do video. But if you think about the show that I'm doing, this is the kind of video that I could offer, which is talking head video, which isn't really give any value. Now, I used to do a show with chapters where there were every, thing we talked about, there was a different picture involved. If I was still doing that production, that would make a better YouTube video, but the work for that was not worth the effort that I was putting into it, especially because in the audio side, technologically, unfortunately, chapters and inserted ads don't play together. As soon as you insert an ad, you lose all chapters with the current technology, and that meant that I was literally charging myself $2,000 a month or so to keep the chapters in the podcast and spending hours of my time doing it. And finally, uh, I had a change in my life when my parents died last year, and reevaluated some things and was looking towards retirement and reevaluated. And one of the things that went was the work of doing those chapters, which would work better on YouTube, but I don't know that it would work as well as a video show. And video production for travel is a lot more work.
yeah, I'm sorry for your loss, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well, they were 96 and 97, so they had a very good runs.
You know, um, so let me move on to my next question, and this is about AI and travel content. Right now, you are in the inspiration space, you are in the suggestion space, if I dare say that. Right today, Chat GPT is generating travel itineraries instantaneously. How do you think of them as competitors or as threats for you and travel bloggers? Right? What's your edge in the AI era?
So I have a love-hate relationship with ChatGPT in particular. Happens to be the AI I use most. I use it quite a lot for production. I do use it for creating show notes because it's easy to take a podcast and give it to ChatGPT and tell me, what the itinerary was we talked about. Obviously, ChatGPT and things like it are uh, in some ways stealing the content that travel content creators are creating, and using that for their benefit. Because I don't know if you're aware of this, the ChatGPT is actually not traveling anywhere.
Yeah.
ChatGPT doesn't know anything about any destination anywhere unless it gets it from someone else. Um, there are there are obviously issues also with the current generation of things that I wouldn't rely on it. I wouldn't book your tickets based on the information that you get in there without some real fact checking. But it is a useful tool. I've definitely myself said, can you recommend what to do for a 7-day itinerary in Japan? Although quite often it ends up with a 10-day itinerary because it can't count worth beans. But it is a useful tool for summarizing things that are out there, but it is going to have a complicated relationship with content creators and is already driving some content creators out of business. In which case, it's just going to be using regurgitated content from other AI sources, in which case the travel content will decrease in quality. And as it is, I mean, the way that AI works, I'm an engineer, right? So I
Yeah.
understand something about how large language models work. Is they are literally a statistics engine, and they are made to give you average content. Um, and so they really are taking everything they learned and giving you the average recommendation. There's disadvantages to that if you want a more than average trip. So I still think I'm not worried about there being a role for first person reported current information on different destinations, where you should go, where you shouldn't go, and what you should do. Um, but AI is a challenge to my industry, especially to bloggers right now.
Hmm.
AI, and not just the AI changes that Google has made, but all of the other changes they've made as they panic over all of the tsunami of AI traffic that has gone their way has meant that they have taken a lot of traffic away from independent bloggers and given it to things like Reddit,
Yeah.
because of some decisions they've made, and that has driven people right out of the industry. It has made it a lot harder to make a living as a travel blogger, and it is any type of blogger, but travel we know has been particularly hit. And there are definitely sites out there that are entirely AI created, and their content is crap. But that is one of the things that Google is struggling with, is they don't know how to tell the good stuff from the bad stuff right now, and that will be an ongoing war that they will not necessarily win.
Got it. You know, in a very, similar space, I work on writing a bunch of blogs for our website, right? These are focused on, we are a company that's in the business travel space. So these are blogs that are meant to help people make travel bookings.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 80% of the content we write inside a blog is content that you would find pretty much in any similar blog, right? But the last 20%, right, the icing on the cake, if you will, is the unique insights that we can bring by virtue of our experience you know in being in the industry and in understanding feedback from you know thousands of travelers, right, as they've gone through that. And I draw the example of your ex-boss is TripAdvisor, right? Looking at a boarding pass and being able to understand that this seat does not have a window next to it, right?
Right.
That's the kind of expertise that I believe, LLM models will take time to build, right? And which is where independent bloggers, right, and content creators can always leave their mark. So, you know, 80% content, which is useful maybe to an average person, is fine. But when someone really understands the nitty-gritties of something, right, that's when you add true value, right? And that's probably how content creators can stand out.
Well, and one of the things, if you look at any blog post I've done recently, you are likely to see that there's a picture of me standing in the destination. And I'm not someone who historically takes a lot of selfies. But
Right.
the reason I do that is I want you to know that I was actually there. I
Right.
actually ate that food. I actually, you know, rode on that train. I actually know what I'm talking about. That doesn't mean
Hmm.
I'm an expert, that I know everything about every destination in the world, but at least it's firsthand experience.
Yeah.
And there's some reason you should trust the information you're getting from me. And we'll see that more and more as a differentiator. Is there definitely, I won't take an article, even when I was taking guest posts, which I've stopped doing recently. I won't take an article that includes pictures that are just Creative Commons licensed pictures, or pictures that are coming from stock photography, because that means you weren't there.
Yeah.
The reason why you're using those photos is not because you forgot your cell phone that day. It's because you weren't there and you're writing. And I've had articles that have been pitched to me that have been incredibly bad. And now we're seeing things like that appear on the internet in more quantity and get more traffic than they used to. I've had people pitch me that, when you go to San Francisco, you should definitely do the surfing rather, in North Beach. In North Beach, you'd think from the name has a beach, but it is no longer connected to the water. It's a neighborhood of San Francisco. It's good for eating Italian food, but there is no beach, there is no surfing. And I've seen those articles, and there was a lot of crap articles getting written before AI. It was just getting written by people who were being paid $5 an hour in third world
Drive
countries
people
and
to North
hadn't been to
Beach.
those
Yeah.
destinations. That work has gone away and has been replaced by chatbots that have also never been there and are writing based on what they understand. And I use understand in quotes because that's the thing that a lot of people don't know, is that a chat AI system, chat GPT or something like that, doesn't know anything. And I mean that in a strict technical way. It's a statistical model. It doesn't know what it knows, and it doesn't know what it doesn't know. So it's never lying to you. It just doesn't know truth. It's using a statistical prediction with some randomization thrown in so that it is more creative. But it literally doesn't know when it's making stuff up because it doesn't have that. It doesn't have understanding in that fashion. So it's amazing that it works as well as it does, and it's really cool technology, and I love it. As I say, I have a love-hate relationship with it. But in terms of trusting it and booking your trip without at least finding out where it got that information or asking it to fact check itself, it is funny when you ask ChatGPT to write something and then you tell it to fact check what it wrote, and it says, "Oh no, sorry, that's not right." But if you understand how the technology works, it's not surprising.
Yeah, agree with you. Staying on travel. Now, COVID was the proverbial doom of travel, right? But, in 2025, travel's back, right? And it's growing at 10%.
It
Now,
is back, but we're definitely seeing a softening in that market, especially where I
mhm,
am in the U.S.
okay.
For the politics have definitely softened the U.S. market and also softened people leaving the country. I'm seeing Amateur Traveler has been syndicated to different airlines this year,
Hmm.
to 9 different airlines and 38 different episodes so far over 2025. And I'm seeing a softening of that. And when I ask my guy, the guy who sells Amateur Traveler into airlines, what's
Hmm.
going on, he says it's not me. It's airlines are cutting back. They're expecting a downturn at this point, is what he's seeing. So we're seeing some softening in the travel market domestically and
Right.
related to the US. Now, I think the China market is still, something that is inevitable. I think the India market is still something that is inevitable as we see the rise of the middle class in both of those very
Yeah.
large countries. That I think global travel is something that is not going away anytime soon, hopefully, because it would take another bad thing like a pandemic for that. But it's a little more mixed than 2024 was. Definitely a lot of pent up demand for travel. We
Yeah.
saw a lot of revenge travel, which I thought was a very bad term. I never
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't
quite
like that
liked that
either.
term, but I didn't come up with better ones.
But staying on the topic, you know, post COVID, let's say even last year, this year, right? There is demand, but there is also the way people travel. you know I know you write either a blog or a podcast on travel trends, right? So what have you seen as shifts in people's behaviors, right? Are people traveling at different times now? Are they going to more of these m- less mainstream destinations, say Namibia, for example, right? Or you know what
So
kind of
are
trends are
most
jumping
people
out at
or
you?
are some people? And I think that's really what's happening is there's a bifurcation in the travel market right now. We're definitely seeing that the some of the younger travelers, for instance, have always been a little more adventurous than the older travelers. I mean, that has been generational for a while. We're seeing, you'll hear a lot of talk about adventure travel being on the rise, it's experiential travel being on the rise. But on the other hand, they're also just building bigger and bigger cruise ships. So there's both going on. There's definitely
Hmm.
mass market tourism. Barcelona's problems with tourists aren't going to go away anytime soon. Those places that get a lot of tourism will probably still get a lot of tourism. People should go to other
Hmm.
places nearby that are less crowded, and that's one of the reasons we talk about them more on the show. Yeah, we'll talk about Paris. We'll talk about Barcelona, but we'll also talk about Girona. And
Right.
if you are tired of the crowds in Barcelona, you really got to go up to Girona, which is just a beautiful city, just an hour drive or a railroad train ride from Barcelona, and worth visiting, and all of that Costa Brava area. So there are other places that people should go. I think the internet in general here over the last 20 years has made that easier to find some of those
Hmm.
destinations. I don't think the TikTokification, we talked about in social media, but it's the Instagramification of travel. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. The
Hmm.
I just want to go to get that picture that I saw on Instagram is a huge driver of travel, especially I think in the younger crowd. But I don't think that's a change that we're going to see go away. It is stunning to see how many people just need that one picture, and then they're gone and are not necessarily getting a deep dive into the culture. I think there are better ways to travel, in my opinion, but I think that's a type of travel that will continue. So
Right.
I think there's all sorts of different things. I hear travel experts, trying to pick one of those threads and say, "See, we're the Adventure Travel Trade Association says, see, look, here are the stats that says there's much more adventure travel." That's true. But at the same time, if you looked at just sheer number of people getting on, the 5,000 person cruise ship, which is the destination really at that point, more so than the stops you're going to, that's also very popular. And some of that's driven by cost, some of that's driven by what you know and what your neighbors have done, and some of that is just what people like. I like the thing that is easy and feels safe and gets me out of my everyday. And I don't take a side on what is the right way to travel. I think there are things I prefer personally,
Hmm.
a more culturally deep, more knowledgeable, more travel where you learn things, because I like to learn things. But I
Yeah.
understand I had a boss who could never relax until he was lying on a beach in Hawaii. And for him, the fly and flop vacation of just going to Hawaii and lying on a beach was the perfect vacation. And I understand that. I won't throw stones at that.
Yeah. Yeah. Travel means different things to different people. That I've realized that. Yeah, there are people who have a checklist. When they go to a place, they want to make sure that they've crossed off every item on the checklist. And I remember,
And I do that. It's just my checklist is UNESCO World Heritage sites,
yeah,
sites that the UN has determined are significant in our patronage, basically for patrimony, rather for the world as a whole.
and I remember my own vacation, right? This one to Turkey. Um, I was, when I went to Turkey, on my schedule was Istanbul, Antalya, and Cappadocia, I think. Um, and I just like the culture in Istanbul so much that I ended
Hmm.
up spending the entire trip in Istanbul and walking every nook and corner of the city. So yeah, for me, checklists are not my things, right? But then again, right, different people are
You can
different.
look on my site and my about page, and I'll link you to my bucket list, and I have one that I'm working through. So I do believe in checklists, and I think sometimes going on a quest to get to every U.S. national park or something like that I've talked to people about can actually lead you to places that you wouldn't have thought of going, or to every UNESCO site can help you discover things that you wouldn't have thought of, and also get you off the beaten track. So I I'm not opposed to lists. You tell me you want to get to
Yeah.
every winery in Washington State like a friend of mine did. More power to you. Raise
So
a
let
glass for me.
let's talk about your list of favorite airports and hotels.
Okay.
Right? You've been around the world, you've been around the US. Um, you know, if you have to take a step back, right? Which would be the top five airports you pick, and the top five hotels you would pick?
Top five airports. Well, Singapore. That's an amazing and stunning airport. Um, Almost none of the ones in the major airports in Europe. I don't like the system of we're not going to tell you where your gate is until you got 25 minutes and then you have to run there. Detroit is surprisingly good. My home airports of San Jose and San Francisco are both lovely airports. I haven't been to the new LaGuardia one, but I'm
Hmm.
curious about that. Um,
I've been there.
my least
I've
favorite is Nairobi, which we actually had to hire someone to try and figure out how it worked. That was a very complicated airport where we ended up losing half our luggage for at least a day. I'm trying to think of what other airports. Schiphol is actually, I said
hmm
it, none of the European airports,
Yeah,
but any airport that has a lending library for the local library, I think you just have to say there's something really fun
you have to
about
love
that
it.
airport.
Yeah, and let's take the Detroit airport. What makes it unique in your view?
So one of the things that I liked about the Detroit airport is it is a little smaller. The smaller airports tend to be a little easier to get in and out of. I also had a chance to stay at the airport hotel, which has its own gate entry. And so you can go from the front desk to in the terminal in 5 minutes, which is which has affected my opinion of that. But also it's what kind of food can you find? So places like the Charlotte airport with some good barbecue, even DW Dallas Fort Worth, a lot of people hate the airport, but I could get some decent food options there, so I don't mind it quite as much. I like an airport that has public transportation all the way to the airport. So even JFK, which is not my favorite airport, there's nothing wrong with that airport that Dynamite would not fix. But I like the fact that I can get on a subway and get all the way out there, or
Got it.
Boston Logan and such. Which is not my favorite airport in terms of how small some of the gates are and some of the terminals. But I like the fact that I can, easily get on the city's transportation and don't necessarily have to take an Uber or a taxi or something like that. That's
Got
kind
it.
of what I'm looking for in an airport. So Madrid, for instance, where you can, easily hop on a train and go downtown, or Frankfurt again, where you can easily get on a train and get almost anywhere in Europe. Those are convenient airports to fly into, if they can be a little frustrating to fly through sometimes.
Yeah, got it. This brings me to a very interesting idea. I'm sure, I'll probably think about it. Picking airports by criteria, right? Best food, right? Best ways to get to the airport. The ease of getting to the airport hotel. Uh, you know, you're a treasure trove of information and treasure trove of ideas. So thank you for that. I know we've reached near the end of our slot, so I'll skip the question on hotels, maybe circle back for our next conversation. You know,
All right, all right.
my final question to you, Chris, is about travel hacks. Right? You've traveled so much. I'm sure you've traveled for work as well, not just for
Not
amateur
not
traveler.
as much, not as much for
Mhm.
work.
But, irrespective of whether the traveler is traveling for leisure or business, there are always trips and insights, uh, that can help a traveler. Right? What's the stuff after 20 years of amateur traveler that you think most people miss?
Well, the best travel hack I have is before your next trip, actually write, if you don't have one already, a packing list. But keep that packing list for the next trip
Hmm.
and the next trip and the next trip. So I have a generic packing list and it has sections on it. One section says, beach and summer. One section says winter. One section says volunteer trips to Mexico, which I've done 15 of or so. So it warranted its own space. One says business travel. And so as I look at the trip, I say, well, this one's to warm weather. I can cross off everything that's cold weather, but I don't have to think when I'm packing. So I can
Mhm.
pack in probably 15 minutes. And I hear people who are struggling with packing. And it's just not that big a deal if you learn from the last trip. Every time you're on the trip and you say, "Oh, I can't believe I didn't bring that," you write it on your list. Or for me,
Mhm.
it's an electronic copy. It's I use the Things app on the Mac so that I have it on all my devices. But basically, just get organized about your travel. There's some things that I always have my uh, my toiletry kit and my little plastic bag of the liquids. Those are packed right now, even though I'm not going on a trip until next week because they stay packed. I have an extra toothbrush and I have an extra toothpaste and I have an extra deodorant and all those things that just sit in my travel kit. I have, things that just stay in my suitcase, like the AirTag and things like that. And so I just don't worry about even trying to remember to bring them. But everything
Got
else
it.
is on my list, including things to do, including,
Got it.
turn off the Wi Fi on the phone, take out the garbage, download shows from the TiVo to watch on the plane, update the airline app so that I've got the latest airline app so I can watch the movies. For international travel, register for STEP, which is the State Department's travel enrollment program out of here in the United States, which basically lets the State Department know that I'm traveling to a foreign country so that if something were to happen, they would know how to get a hold of me and they would know they'd need to get a hold of me. So all of those
Right.
things are on my packing list, and it just takes some of the stress out. The other thing in terms of taking stress out is get to the airport half an hour earlier than you think you need to. Just, don't be that person who's running through security with their hair on fire because they saved everything to the last minute. Um, you know, bring your podcast along so you have something to do as you're waiting for your plane. But just there's no reason to start a trip stressed, and you can save some of that just by getting there a little earlier.
Got it. And maybe your final tip for our listeners.
Well, obviously, listen to Amateur Traveler Podcast for more information about where to go, because we'll give you a good idea of how to use your travel dollars better by going to a place that you're going to love. We're
Well,
not
that's
going
a
to,
good.
I'm not going to tell you that every episode we do, you're going to say is added to your list. I just listened to one and I thought, yeah, I don't need to go there. But my role is to help you figure out if this destination or if this trip is for you. If we can describe it in detail, some of them you're going to go, I absolutely need to do. And other ones you're going to go, glad to hear it, don't need to do it.
Got it. Well, Chris, this has been a super interesting conversation. And that last tip I'm definitely going to use. I have a trip coming up to San Francisco. I've been there mostly for work, but this time I have some time to go explore San Francisco. So, listeners, right? Chris has an amazing podcast called The Amateur Traveler. If you are going out, whether for a vacation or for work, right? It may make sense for you to go listen to his podcast. He may have a bunch of great tips for you. He's obviously shared a bunch of great tips in our conversation today, some of which I will try to put out, as part of our content, and through Chris's channel as well. So, make best use of, you know, the stuff that Chris has talked about today. Chris, you've been super insightful as a guest. Thank you so much. You know,
Thank you for having
I
me.
can say this 1 hour that I've spent with you has been very, very enlightening in more ways than one. So thank you so much.